George W. Bush, the 43rd President of the United States, is a figure whose presidency was profoundly shaped by the events of September 11, 2001. This day not only transformed American foreign policy, but also had a lasting impact on global affairs. To fully understand the ramifications of his presidency, we must first explore his background and the context in which he took office. George Walker Bush was born on July 6, 1946, in New Haven, Connecticut. As the son of George H.W. Bush, the 41st president, George W. Bush grew up in a family deeply involved in politics. His early life was marked by a sense of privilege, but also by a personal struggle to establish his own identity, apart from his father's legacy. After attending Yale University, Bush entered the oil industry, a sector that would have a significant impact on his future. In 1978, Bush founded Arbusto Energy, which faced financial difficulties. Despite these setbacks, he managed to steer the company through a merger with Spectrum 7. His experience in the oil industry not only shaped his business acumen, but also his views on energy's policy and global economics. Bush's connections in the oil industry proved advantageous, as they provided him with a network of influential figures who would later support his political career. In 1994, Bush ran for governor of Texas, a move that marked his transition from business to politics. His governorship was characterized by a focus on education reform, tax cuts, and criminal justice policies. These initiatives earned him recognition and set the stage for his presidential campaign. His tenure as governor helped him build a political base and hone his leadership skills. The 2000 presidential election was one of the most contentious in U.S. history. George W. Bush, the Republican candidate, faced Democratic nominee Al Gore, the vice president under Bill Clinton. The election was incredibly close, with the decisive factor being the state of Florida. The race was marred by disputes over ballot counts and allegations of voter suppression. The legal battle that followed culminated in a Supreme Court decision, Bush v. Gore, which effectively awarded the presidency to Bush. The narrow margin of victory and the contentious nature of the election led to questions about the legitimacy of his presidency. This contentious start foreshadowed the challenges Bush would face in his first term. The morning of September 11, 2001 began like any other, but it quickly turned into a day of unprecedented tragedy. 4 airplanes were hijacked by terrorists affiliated with Al-Qaeda. 2 planes crashed into the World Trade Center towers in New York City, causing the buildings to collapse. A 3rd plane struck the Pentagon in Washington, D.C., while the 4th plane, United Airlines Flight 93, crashed into a field in Pennsylvania after passengers attempted to overcome the hijackers. The attacks resulted in nearly 3,000 deaths and caused a profound shock to the nation. President Bush was in Florida visiting an elementary school when he received the news. His immediate response was crucial in reassuring a shaken public while preparing for a response. That evening, Bush addressed the nation, declaring that the U.S. would not distinguish between those who committed the attacks and those who harbored them. This declaration marked the beginning of a new era of U.S. foreign policy. In the wake of 9/11, the Bush administration launched Operation Enduring Freedom, targeting the Taliban regime in Afghanistan, which was harboring Osama bin Laden and other al-Qaeda members. The initial military campaign was swift and successful in overthrowing the Taliban government and disrupting al-Qaeda's operations. However, the subsequent mission faced significant challenges. The Taliban retreated to the mountainous regions of Afghanistan and launched a prolonged insurgency. Despite the early successes, the inability to stabilize Afghanistan and the continued insurgency raised questions about the long-term objectives of the mission. The pursuit of bin Laden, who ultimately escaped to Pakistan, highlighted the difficulties of achieving lasting peace in the region. As the war on terror continued in Afghanistan, the Bush administration turned its attention to Iraq. In 2003, the US launched an invasion of Iraq, citing concerns about weapons of mass destruction, or WMDs, and alleged ties between Saddam Hussein's regime and terrorist organizations. The decision to invade was influenced by key members of Bush's administration, including Vice President Dick Cheney and Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld. The invasion was initially supported by many, but as the months passed, the rationale for the war came under scrutiny. No WMDs were found, and the alleged links between Hussein and al-Qaeda were discredited. The conflict quickly devolved into a brutal insurgency, with sectarian violence destabilizing Iraq. The lack of a clear exit strategy and the ensuing chaos raised questions about the war's justification and its long-term impact. The wars in Afghanistan and Iraq resulted in substantial human and financial costs. Over 7,000 US service members lost their lives, and hundreds of thousands of civilians were killed or displaced. The financial burden of the wars exceeded $2 trillion, contributing to the national debt and impacting the US economy. The wars also had a profound effect on veterans and their families. Many service members experienced post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD, and other mental health issues, highlighting the human cost of prolonged conflict. The financial strain also had repercussions on domestic spending and economic policy. The global impact of the Iraq War was significant. The conflict strained relations with key allies, particularly in Europe, where opposition to the war was strong. The invasion and subsequent occupation fueled anti-American sentiment and contributed to the rise of extremist groups. The power vacuum created in Iraq led to the emergence of ISIS, further destabilizing the region and complicating efforts to achieve lasting peace. The broader implications of the war extended to US foreign policy and global security. The emphasis on preemptive action and the use of military force in the name of counter-terrorism altered the international landscape and influenced subsequent conflicts. Domestically, the post-September 11th era saw significant changes in US policies and practices. The USA PATRIOT Act, enacted shortly after the attacks, granted broad surveillance powers to federal agencies. This raised concerns about privacy and civil liberties, as well as the balance between security and individual freedoms. The Bush administration's authorization of enhanced interrogation techniques, which many critics labeled as torture, sparked a heated debate about the ethics of counterterrorism practices. These issues remain relevant today as the balance between national security and human rights continues to be a contentious topic. In addition to the wars and security issues, Bush's presidency was also marked by the financial crisis of 2008. The collapse of major financial institutions and the resulting economic downturn had a profound impact on the US and global economies. The crisis prompted a massive government bailout of banks and a stimulus package aimed at stabilizing the economy. The handling of the financial crisis, along with the ongoing wars, contributed to a challenging end to Bush's presidency. The economic troubles and the controversial policies of his administration influenced public perception and shaped the political landscape for years to come. The legacy of George W. Bush is a subject of ongoing debate. While his leadership in the immediate aftermath of September 11th was initially praised, his presidency is also associated with significant controversies and challenges. The wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, the handling of the financial crisis, and the impact on civil liberties are key aspects of his legacy. In recent years, public opinion on Bush has evolved. Some view his presidency with a degree of sympathy, recognizing the difficult circumstances he faced. Others continue to hold him accountable for the decisions and policies that defined his time in office. The presidency of George W. Bush was shaped by the unprecedented events of September 11, 2001, and the subsequent decisions made in response. The wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, the impact on global politics, and the changes to domestic policies all contributed to a complex and controversial legacy. As we reflect on this era, it is important to consider the lessons learned and how they continue to influence the world today. This video was made in remembrance of those who lost their lives on 9/11 and in the years that followed. If you found this reflection meaningful, we invite you to follow our channel for more in-depth explorations of history. Thank you.